Your Royal Highness, Minister, Your Excellencies, County Governor, Mayor, laureates, guests, and friends of the University. On behalf of the University of Bergen, it is my privilege to welcome you all to this year's Holberg Prize and Nils Klim Prize award ceremony. The Holberg Prize and the Nils Klim Prize were established by the Norwegian Parliament in 2003 to honor internationally leading scholars in the humanities, social sciences, law, and theology. For 2 decades, the Holberg Prize has recognized a distinguished list of outstanding academics. The prize is named after Ludvig Holberg, who grew up here in Bergen. He was a writer, an historian, and a humanist. Holberg believed that arguments must be grounded in reason. Only then can public discourse remain a space where falsehood and distortions of reality are held at bay. And as an Enlightenment philosopher, he wove ideas of compassion and tolerance into his literary works. Holberg's wisdom, wit, and imagination are quality we need today, perhaps more relevant than ever. And we also need the clear and courageous voices of outstanding scholars. It is they whom these prizes honor. Over the past 20 years, the Holberg Prize and the Nils Klim Prize has become vital prisms through which to examine the great questions throughout history. The Holberg Prize has not only honored Holberg's Enlightenment ideas, but it's also made it clear that perspectives from the humanities, social sciences, law, and theology are indispensable to addressing the challenges that concern us all, as individuals and as societies. Today, we celebrate the remarkable contributions of 2 brilliant scholars, Holberg Prize laureate Gayatri Chakravorty Spivak and Nils Klim Prize laureate Daniela Alaattinoğlu. Congratulations to both the laureates and welcome to this year's award ceremony. Thank you.
Your Royal Highness, Your Excellencies, dear laureates, ladies and gentlemen, friends and colleagues. This is a festive occasion, and we are gathered to honor 2 excellent researchers and scholars. Congratulations to you both. It is important that we celebrate thinkers such as yourselves. We live in a world that is less safe, and we share the responsibility to find solutions to complex issues of global tensions, global inequalities, nature and climate at risk, health challenges, and tackling new technologies. And we need to do this in a time where common understanding of knowledge and facts is under pressure. Academic freedom, the free pursuit of knowledge, is a fundamental value for any democracy. Free speech for students, faculty, and everyone else is crucial for a free and just society. Safety from war, oppression, and censorship is a prerequisite for all scholarly work. And in this world, and more so perhaps than for a long time now, we need to stand up for science. We must continue to collaborate across borders and cultures, because this open transfer of knowledge is fundamental for a peaceful development of open, free, and democratic societies, and to solving the major challenges of our time. I am truly inspired by our laureates, Professor Spivak and Assistant Professor Alaattinoğlu. You have proven both intellectual capacity, tenacity, perseverance, and you both have extensive international experience, and you use your intellectual capacity and your knowledge for good by taking active parts in the public debate, and I thank you for that. You lead the way as researchers in your fields, but you're also role models as citizens. You help us understand and you inspire us to engage ourselves, which, in essence, is what academia is for. You also both speak out on behalf of the voices that we all too often ignore. So today we honor your contribution, and congratulations again to both of you, and thank you so much.
Your Royal Highness, Minister, Your Excellencies, Mayor, laureates, distinguished guests and friends from Norway and abroad. Today, we are delighted to honor and celebrate the 2025 laureates, Professor Gayatri Chakravorty Spivak and Assistant Professor Daniela Alaattinoğlu. As chair of the board of the Holberg Prize, appointed by the University of Bergen, it is my great privilege to guide you through this award ceremony. We are gathered in the University Aula in Bergen, the home of the Holberg Prize, to celebrate these outstanding laureates who have made groundbreaking contributions to the academic fields covered by the Holberg Prize and the Nils Klim Prize. The Holberg Prize was, as we heard, established by the Norwegian Parliament in 2003, covering research areas not covered by the Nobel Prizes. The prize is administered by the University of Bergen on behalf of the Norwegian Ministry of Education and Research. The prize is named, as we have also heard already, after Ludvig Holberg, a Danish-Norwegian intellectual born here in Bergen in 1684. Writing in the natural law tradition, Holberg's comedies, his satires, his moral essays, and his other academic work profoundly influenced Scandinavian cultural development up to this day. Each year, 2 prizes are awarded in the academic fields of the humanities, social sciences, law, and theology. The main Holberg Prize and the Nils Klim Prize. These prizes are awarded by the Holberg Board based on the recommendation of academic committees composed of outstanding international scholars in the relevant fields. The committees select their candidates from nominations submitted from scholars and institutions worldwide. One of the primary ambitions of these prizes is to inspire and engage young scholars and to promote dialogue across generations of researchers. The Nils Klim Prize is therefore awarded annually to a young researcher under 40 years of age from or working in a Nordic country. Named after a young protagonist in Holberg's novel Nils Klim's Underground Travels from 1741, the prize is valued at 500,000 Norwegian kroner. On behalf of the University of Bergen and following the recommendation of the Nils Klim Committee, the board of the Holberg Prize has awarded this year's Nils Klim Prize to Assistant Professor Daniela Alaattinoğlu. Born in 1989, Daniela Alaattinoğlu is an assistant professor of law at the University of Turku. She is the principal investigator of the ERC project From the Margin to the Center, Rights Development, Transitional Justice and Indigeneity in the Nordics. Her research has been supported by grants from the Icelandic Research Fund, the Swedish Cultural Foundation in Finland, and the Research Council of Finland, among others. Dr. Alaattinoğlu has published in leading international journals. Her key publications include the monograph Grievance Formation, Rights and Remedies, Involuntary Sterilization and Castration in the Nordics, 1930s to 2020s, and the co-edited volume Contesting Femicide, Feminism and the Power of Law Revisited. Dr. Alaattinoğlu holds a PhD in law from 2019 from the European University Institute, and she has been awarded the title of Docent of Socio-Legal Studies by the University of Turku. She has been a visiting fellow at institutions including the University of Melbourne and the Max Planck Institute for Social Anthropology. Dr. Alaattinoğlu is also the co-editor of Rettferd, the Nordic Journal of Law and Justice, and the co-founder of the research environment Law, Space and Justice at the Turku Law Faculty. With research and teaching experience at 10 higher education institutions across 6 countries, Dr. Alaattinoğlu's work examines how laws and societies evolve together, how groups mobilize for change, and how law intersectionally includes and excludes individuals and groups. The Nils Klim Committee finds that in addition to her main works, Alaattinoğlu has published an impressive number of high-quality journal articles and book chapters. The committee emphasizes how Alaattinoğlu brings legal issues to bear on relevant global concerns and human rights. They also underline how she has established herself as an independent scholar, working across borders and cultures, drawing on various disciplines in coming to task with and interconnecting complex legal and social issues. The committee is impressed by how Alaattinoğlu contributes regularly to discussions in the public sphere through working papers and policy reports, as well as op-eds and blog posts. Such work is carried out in Finnish, Swedish, Norwegian, Spanish, and English. The committee finds that Alaattinoğlu's academic contributions contain important future challenges for several relevant legal, social, and political spheres on the international scene. The Holberg Board has approved the recommendation of the Nils Klim Committee and finds Daniela Alaattinoğlu to be a most worthy recipient of the 2025 Nils Klim Prize. I now invite Minister of Research and Higher Education, Sigrun Aasland, and Daniela Alaattinoğlu to approach the stage where the Minister Aasland will confer this year's Nils Klim Prize on the laureate.
Your Royal Highness, Crown Prince Haakon, Minister of Research and Higher Education, Sigrun Aasland, Your Excellencies, Mayor Marit Warnke, Madam Rector Margaret Hagen, Holberg Prize laureate Gayatri Chakravorty Spivak, esteemed members of the Nils Klim Committee and the Holberg Board, family, friends, and colleagues. I am extremely grateful to join the ranks of the Nils Klim laureates today. As a lawyer, through the Nils Klim and Holberg Prizes platforms, I would like to emphasize the importance of keeping the law engaged with questions of equality and social justice. I received this prize at a time of turmoil. Globally, it has never been clearer that the countries and leaders who make up the rules are the ones who also most blatantly break and redefine them to serve their own purposes. One manifestation of this is seen in the international community's debates over whether the egregious and dehumanizing attacks on Palestinians indeed constitute genocide under international law. Discussions which, once again, call into question the relationship between international law and international justice. This is also a time of attacks on human rights, gender and sexuality studies, as well as efforts to promote diversity and inclusion, paired with growing hostility towards the idea that biology is not destiny. This not only threatens academic freedom, it also has very tangible consequences. By using the law to block access to gender-affirming and reproductive health care, or to restrict other fundamental rights, it makes life more unlivable for many. When I was a law student, one of the first things I learned was how to detect the legally relevant facts in a situation, and to dismiss the rest as legally irrelevant. This context-reducing exercise is central to legal work, determining how rules and principles apply to selected facts of reality. I struggled with this, though, early on. Why was it, for example, so clearly legally relevant that the plaintiff in a case was of a certain age, but irrelevant that she had lived through a history of abuse? Learning to separate the legally relevant from the irrelevant is part of the methodological training that we lawyers receive. It allows for the subsumption of reality under fixed legal categories. This is foundational in legal education, and quite understandably so, since few clients want to hear the answer, well, it's complicated too often. Yet, law students are less often asked to question the validity of the rules and principles themselves, whose interests they represent, in what context they were made, and who decides what counts as relevant in the first place. Which people's perspectives and histories are left out. Along my academic and personal journey, which has taken me across continents, countries, languages, and cultures, and resembles the adventures of Nils Klim in more ways than one, I have been lucky to find others who share my initial discomfort with law as a supposedly complexity-reducing exercise. In my research, I aim to draw on both insider and outsider perspectives to understand the law and its workings, not just asking what the prevailing legal rules and principles are, but also how they have come to be, how nation-state-made law is used to include and exclude, how individuals and groups engage with the law and mobilize to change it, and what makes public institutions respond to such mobilization, as well as whether people actually access the rights that they have been promised by the legal system. Ultimately, for me, it is also about asking how law might become more equal and just. I'm endlessly grateful to the mentors, colleagues, students, funders, institutions, human rights defenders, and civil society organizations from whom I have had the chance to learn, who've supported and engaged with my work thus far, and continue to do so. Finally, thank you to my friends and family, my partner Özgür, and my children Aras and Vilde, for reminding me of the good things in life. Thank you.
Thank you to Benedicte Maurseth for beautiful play, traditional Huldreslottar. The Holberg Prize is awarded annually to scholars who have made outstanding contributions to research in humanities, social sciences, law, or theology, whether within one single discipline or through interdisciplinary work. The value of the prize is 6 million Norwegian kroner. On behalf of the University of Bergen and based on the recommendation of the Holberg Committee, the board of the Holberg Prize has awarded this year's Holberg Prize to Professor Gayatri Chakravorty Spivak. Born in 1942, Spivak is an Indian scholar in literary theory. She has held the position of university professor in the humanities at Columbia University since 2007, where she is also a founding member of the Institute of Comparative Literature and Society. Professor Spivak was educated first at the University of Calcutta and then at Cornell University, where she completed her PhD in 1967. She has taught at more than 20 universities, including the University of Ghana, Princeton University, University of California at Irvine, New School for Social Research, University of Pittsburgh, Brown University, University of Iowa, Northwestern University, and Cornell University. Spivak is a corresponding fellow at the British Academy, a Guggenheim Fellow, and a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and the American Philosophical Society. And, as I have been lately informed, she is also, as a teenager, a three-time Indian champion, debating champion, a three-time Indian debating champion. Spivak has published 9 books and translated many others. Her work has also been translated into well over 20 languages. Her key works include In Other Worlds, Essays in Cultural Politics, a critique of post-colonial reason towards the history of the vanishing present, Death of a Discipline, an aesthetic education in the era of globalization, and Ethics and Politics in Tagore, Ketze, and certain scenes of teaching. Her latest book is Spivak Moving. The Holberg Committee finds that Spivak has inspired and enabled new lines of critical interrogations both at the centers and margins of global modernity, by taking the core of Western thought as an object of critical analysis, and by challenging readers to train the imagination through the study of literature and culture. The committee exemplifies Spivak's research by the highly influential essay, Can the Subaltern Speak? From 1988, which has become a formative text within post-colonial studies and beyond, challenging Western scholarship that includes the perspectives of minoritized groups and their struggles. The committee describes Spivak's works as an interdisciplinary critique of structures of power and knowledge in an unequal world, and emphasizes the importance of central concepts coined by Spivak, such as strategic essentialism, global criticality, and also the planetary, offering an ethical alternative to globalization. The Holberg Committee also comments Spivak's works on translation. She defines translation as a profoundly philosophical and political act of thinking through the limits of dominant modes of knowledge production. The committee highlights her influential translations of Mahasweta Devi's literary works from Bengali, as well as from French, Derrida's philosophical works and Aimé Césaire's political writings. The Holberg Committee is impressed by Spivak's work not only as an influential scholar and a public intellectual, but also as an activist, combating illiteracy in marginalized rural communities across several countries, including in West Bengal, India, where she has founded, funded, and participated in educational initiatives. The Holberg Board has approved the recommendation of the Holberg Committee and finds Professor Gayatri Chakravorty Spivak to be a most worthy recipient of the 2025 Holberg Prize. I now invite His Royal Highness Crown Prince Haakon and Professor Gayatri Chakravorty Spivak to join me here on stage, where His Royal Highness will confer this year's Holberg Prize on Professor Spivak. Yes.
Okay, can you hear me in the back? Yes. I would like to dedicate these remarks of mine to the wonderful Kenyan and Kenyan-American poet, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, my dear friend who died on the 28th of May. Ngugi, I wish you were sitting here. In 1957, 10 years after Indian independence, a group of us adolescents took an oath not to use pre-democratic honorifics such as Majesty, Highness. We were adolescents, very inspired by independence. Honorifics such as Majesty, Highness, Excellency, etc. Apart from me, only one other of that group, the film critic and activist intellectual Shomik Bandyopadhyay, is still alive. So here I go. Dear Crown Prince Haakon, Minister of Research and Higher Education Sigrun Aasland, Madam Rector Margaret Hagen, Nils Klim Prize laureate Daniela, whom I've really come to love. We are moving on the same issues in the same way. I'm so glad. The Nils Klim Prize laureate Daniela Alaattinoğlu, esteemed members of the Holberg Committee and the Holberg Board, friends and colleagues. I accept the 2025 Holberg Prize with shock. So that was my first feeling, with shock, surprise, humility, and bliss. Thank you. Bruno Latour, Ian Hacking, Natalie Zeman-Davis, and Frederick Jameson, these most recent deaths, are with me. I accept this significant prize in the name of peace in Palestine, in Ukraine, for the Rohingyas, and for our battered world. And it is my responsibility to mention here prizes of another kind, as follows. For the last 40 years, as you mentioned, I have run elementary schools in, quote, backward areas of my home state of Bengal. At first, I don't give houses. My teachers have to create interest in the locals and build themselves a shed. And then, if the school has run regularly, like a school, for 2 or 3 years, I build them a real school building. In 2011, I told the villagers at Horipur village that their school would now get a building. I was planning to buy a bit of land in the area. When I arrived in the village, I was presented with a badly printed legal document in Bengali, signed by the thumbprints of 4 local landless, illiterate sharecropping brothers, giving me and my white British assistant the bit of land between their 4 adobe huts for building a 2-room school. Never in history has a so-called untouchable donated land to a caste Hindu and a white man, and never since then. I kept myself from giving way to tears, telling myself with gritted teeth that I had to act as if this was perfectly normal. In fact, what I told myself was, be like the Sphinx. You know, looking out with the nose broken. Perfectly normal. This is a prize that I cherish in another way from a grand prize such as the Holberg. Indeed, from then on, it was as if the donation of land from subaltern to elite for the building of schools was the rule for this social group, certainly not required by me. The second time, the documents will show that nearly 30 technically landless sharecroppers came forward with tiny bits of land that, put together, made enough space for a 2-room school. The smallest bit of land was so tiny that it did not register on the government's computer, but it registered here. The smallest bit of land was so tiny, given by a woman called Onahila, I still remember. The smallest bit of land was so tiny that it did not register on the government's computer. And now, at my newest schools, an extremely poor person, a Santal, was slapping mud on wattle to build a small dwelling for me to sleep in. When asked why he was doing this by my assistant, since he had only talked to me for half an hour or so, I wasn't there. "She has touched me inside," said he. "Amake bhetore chhueche." "She has touched me inside," said he. "These are my prizes, of another kind, nameless but powerful proof that I must be doing something right. In New York City, I return empty plastic soda bottles to big machines for 5 cents back on each in order to hang out with subalterns, because no one but the very poor redeems. And, I look more or less, colored old lady, as if I'm one of them. So in order to hang out with subalterns from many ethnicities, female, male, and trans, without seeming engaged in top-down philanthropy, which I despise. They help me manipulate those awkward redeeming machines as they help each other. One such guy, an African-American with a feather in his do-rag, helped me, gave me 60 cents, and walked away. I pursued him into the street, for I didn't think the money was mine. "People give me money," he said, "so I thought I would give you some." Enough. I thought this audience would sense that these prizes, since they would never get on digitized publicity, should be mentioned, even as we are celebrating the worldwide one. Bjørn Inge Bertelsen told me I should say something about my current work. Let me speak then of my slow pursuit of contingency over the decades. Let me tell you another story. In 2020, I was teaching a course with a celebrated mathematics professor, Michael Harris, in fact, celebrated mathematics professor at Columbia University. He invited an equally celebrated mathematician, Kevin Buzzard, to teach our class one day. He seemed at that point to be interested in numbers theory. And so at the end, I asked him why he was interested in numbers theory. And he said, "Because I can get correct answers." And I said, "But that way you miss the contingent." He seemed to like my comment, but we did not have the time to take it any further. Over these last few days, it has become abundantly clear, I hope, to my audiences that as a humanities teacher, I am focused on the contingent that is unaccountably generated by every seemingly necessary system. The contingent escapes every system, however complex. This can be fully suffered when you are working the system. In this brief compass, all that can be said is that this contingent, a wild contradiction, the accidental, questions and supplements all totalities. It is unverifiable in terms of the system we have been developing, and it is the prime mover of history. Otherwise, things would be at a standstill. It is the prime mover of history. Without this moment available to the imaginative activism of the humanities, we see totalitarianisms committed to preserving the system at all costs, all over the world, regardless of left and right. 3 of us friends read a bit of Hegel some Sundays. A couple of weeks before I was obliged to write this down for you, we read in the foreword to Hegel's Phenomenology that the accidental as such shows us the greatest work of the negative. Then the next week we read that it is the accidental, I'm obliged to read contingent, that changes shape, since it must remain accidental, and moves from the human subject's apparent control into the abstraction of the worldly, to show that in that abstraction, the positive and the negative are the same substance, because it shows the uniformity of the capacity to differentiate. This is extraordinarily important. This is what I was talking about in terms of undoing oppositions, undoing. So they show that they are the same because the uniformity of the capacity to differentiate, to insist that my system is necessarily true is to insist on totality and may lead to totalitarianisms, mild or harsh, to leave the space open for what has not been anticipated and what cannot be predicted on the basis of any prior calculation to emerge, is to acknowledge the possibility of change, of active historiography, or as relay beyond us. We will then work for the philosophers of the future rather than close our perfected systems. I study the great 20th century visionary historian and sociologist W.E.B. Du Bois. Let me quote here his acknowledgement of contingency. I quote, "What I have done well will live long and justify my life. What I have done ill or never finished can now be handed on to others for endless days to be finished, perhaps better than I could have done, and that peace will be my applause." Handed on to others for endless days to be finished. This narrativization of contingency can be called the future anterior that crowns good practice, that something else will have happened from what we must so tightly plan. And it is, of course, the unverifiable telos or end of all events of life, act, or thought. The unverifiable, fiction as goal. And it is the humanities that teach us to learn from the unverifiable, the singular, thus giving us a special focus on the knowledge produced by the qualitative social sciences. Think of Karl Marx insisting, and I quote in English, think of Karl Marx insisting that the proletarian revolution of the 19th century will take its content from the poetry of the future. That's Marx. Marx, a PhD in European classical jurisprudence, hard to understand in this simple declaration unless involved in working the system. I'm not trained to argue this into probability in the natural sciences, but I believe it can be done. Another thought I have been representing and repeating these last few days has been that if all other disciplines produce knowledge, the humanities, literary and philosophical, teach the practice of learning. A systemic suggestion that gets undone in the doing. To know something is to make it the knowing subject's object. To learn it is to enter its space. This is what I was saying about the UNDP. To learn it is to enter its space, resisting the self's desire to control. This is also the structure of democracy, entering the mind space of other people to think equality. Indeed, this is the secret of unconditional ethics. Ahoy tuki. This is the condition of this is the secret of unconditional ethics, not just doing good while doing well, sustaining the profit margin. Some of us call it the prayer to be haunted by the other, and it is this secular prayer that the humanities teach. No hope of a just society if every generation is not persistently weaned from the basic human affects of greed, fear, and violence, disregarding race, class, gender apartheid. Unless there is persistent, sustained, and worldwide epistemic change, mindset change, democracy and ethics cannot be desired, and knowledge is managed for greed, fear, and violence. I should know, I live in New York. In my imagined future anterior, nation states have realized that this work is more crucial, especially in the face of planetarity, than the absurdity of the defense budget, where victory is determined by the number of people killed or diplomacy sustained by fear. There, a worldwide teacher training budget takes first place, using and modifying the already existing international civil society model, going forward in the world's wealth of languages in primary and middle school, and changing the medium to a global lingua franca so that broad structural communications as citizen or politician can be sustained in adult life. Early familiarity with the multilingual world strikes a blow against confining identitarianism, all while using the contingent as instrument of learning. To quote what now the 101-year-old jazz player Marshall Allen learned from his teachers and passes on to future players, and I quote, "Play what you don't know." There you go, humanities. This work is textured work, slow work, where you attempt to braid yourself with the weave of the other space. This is how democracy and ethics are other people. The humanities teacher can call such work reading. The word teacher is not class proud. I was interviewed by one of your journals, and the journalist asked me how I thought of myself. I said classroom teacher. From reading your CV, said the journalist, I should have thought you were an intellectual. If intellectuals are not teachers, and teachers intellectuals, there is no help for the world. And the humanities intellectual works at weaving. In so-called developed countries, emphasis is on structure, not texture. Speed, efficiency, implementation, STEM. Emphasis is on structure, not texture. Structural thought, statistics, generalizations are absolutely necessary, of course. But if not persistently supplemented by textural work, the practice of learning, knowledge will not be managed with justice on our mind. We will talk the talk, not walk the walk. In my classroom at Columbia, I encounter students who, with the humanities trivialized, have only been taught to control the text, to have a quick idea and make the text prove the point of that idea. Superpower self-exceptionalism combined with identity politics so that the abstract subject of global capital can be hidden. The North in the South and the South in the North can be forgotten. And given the harsh treatment of immigrants, identity politics can be seen as salutary. And you know, in India, we call, I mean, not everyone, but people like me, we call them DIPSOs, dollar income private sector. We forget that when we say North and South. So it is with this group, smart and well-meaning, without any ethical training, my students at Columbia, smart and well-meaning, without any ethical training but top-down philanthropy, that our work begins. In that context, I think of what Jacques Derrida has called the new international, given that the old Internationale did not save the human race. In the place of vanguardist organization and paying for the party ticket, the possibility now is of a single teacher, students flung out into the world and time where the classroom is the model for the building of collectivity. And since the classroom is irreducible and the idea is for everyone to be included, we must ask, as we do again and again, how many are we? That's why I'm saying what I'm saying about Daniela. She's one of us. How many are we? Let me end with a summary description of my way of working that I recently sent to Frontier magazine, correcting what a young postdoc had put together. So this is a summary. I opened 4 schools in Purulia district in 1984. The schools were forcibly closed by the local landowner in 2006, and thereby hangs a tale. Subsequently, I worked as selflessly as I could for 24 years, living among the Lohars in Birbhum. When they gave in to the seduction of unregulatable capitalism and felt I was not needed anymore, I left Birhum. You see, if I were an NGO separated, not living with them, they would not be able to interact in this way. So I left Birhum and established 1, then 2, and now by local demand, perhaps 3 schools in another, quote, backward area. I insist that my method is to learn from below, to learn from my mistakes, and that my motive is to see if the intuitions of democracy can be pedagogically transmitted to the children of the very poor, since they vote, largest sector of the electorate, to the children of the very poor. And the work is to attempt to repay my ancestral debt, although that is de facto impossible. This is the end of the summary. Time will not allow me to comment on how I attempt to introduce these subaltern children and teachers to the cartography of the climate-changed world, but I did it yesterday, and some of you have said to me that you appreciated it. How I introduce these subaltern children and teachers to the cartography of the climate-changed world. At Columbia, I'm kept on a tight leash by the corporate university, more and more. But there are still a handful of colleagues who encourage me to think, and students who are crazy enough to come to my classes. By rewarding me, you reward them. My deliverable remains creating a general will for social justice, and it is in their name that this old pacifist thanks you, dear Crown Prince, dear colleagues, dear friends.